Please continue eating while we'll start our lunch program. Raplh Izzo has been Chairman, President, and Chief Executive Officer of Public Service Enterprise Group since the spring of 2007. In college, he was a baseball pitcher, and word has it that he had a screaming fastball. Today, he's captain of a team with $29 billion in assets and annual revenues of $12 billion. His company passed the century mark 7 years ago. He's a well-known leader in the utility industry as well as in the public policy arena. He was an American Physical Society Congressional Science Fellow in the office of Senator Bill Bradley, so I assume he knows his way around this city. He also served 4 years as a senior policy advisor in the office of New Jersey Governor Tom Keene, where he specialized in energy science and technology. He received degrees in mechanical engineering and a doctorate in applied physics from Columbia University. Interestingly, he began his career as a research scientist at the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab, performing numerical simulations of fusion energy experiments. I personally have taken an interest in fusion over the years and had an opportunity to visit the ITER fusion reactor in the south of France. Those of you that are interested in following this, we can get into details later. But the current issue of Scientific American has a very fascinating article on some of the challenges of trying to contain a fusion reaction that's in excess of the heat of the center of the sun. Last fall, I asked him when we might see a working fusion power plant, and he replied, "I hope I see it in my lifetime, but that would presuppose a fair amount of longevity." It is my pleasure to introduce Raplh Izzo to talk about the future of energy and perhaps the coming baseball season.
In the interest in creating some semblance of credibility, I will tell you that I never had a screaming fastball, but 30 years ago it was measured in many, many miles per hour. Never had any risk of being a professional at it, but it was in the low 80s or thereabout. And probably about 10 years ago when my son was 5 years old, I took him to a minor league baseball game and, of course, wanted to impress him with what his dad was capable of doing, and watched all these young fellows throwing the ball at about 70, 75, and I thought, well, how much could I have lost? So let me step up. I need not finish the story. You know the ending. My shoulder throbbed for a month, and instead of needing a radar gun, they could have clocked it with a calendar, because it took... So it was about 65 miles an hour. I cried for days. But anyway, let me begin my formal remarks by telling you a little bit about a forum that I was at a few weeks ago, which you may find a little surprising. It was a forum of New Jersey farmers. Now, you may find that surprising because you might not think of New Jersey first and foremost as a farming community. But in fact, we do produce a fair amount of cranberries, blueberries, peaches, tomatoes, and some other wonderful things. Or you may find that a little surprising because why would farmers want to hear from a utility executive? But it was quite a lesson to me because there was a great deal of interest in the group as I spoke. And the lesson to me is that our industry needs to find a way to awaken farmers, homeowners, renters, residents of cities, suburbs, and towns everywhere to the critical juncture at which we are. And that juncture is one in which we need to rethink energy policy overall. In fact, we need an absolute transformation in energy policy right now. And simply put, it's a matter of sustainability. Not only is our industry, but our nation itself has a tremendous stake in building the world's leading green economy. And I know that's an overused expression, but as a scientist and as a father, I believe fundamentally that we need to change energy if we're going to have an impact on climate change. Even if you believe the future of the planet is not really at risk, and I know there's been some skepticism raised as of late, one cannot overlook the benefits of green energy, just simply in the air we breathe. But there are two other benefits as well, in addition to the cleaning of the environment. Number one, our nation's energy security. I look around the room, and I suspect some of you, as I, can remember 30 years ago when then President Carter tried to encourage us to do more to improve our energy utilization and to improve our energy efficiency. And we've done so little since then. And number two, for the sake of our economy and jobs, green energy is a growth engine that we need to harness in order to stay globally competitive. In fact, I will tell you in a few minutes about some of the things that we're doing at PSEG in terms of investing in energy efficiency and renewables. And I must tell you that the vendors we are meeting with originate with their supply chain in China, Japan, France, Germany, Israel, and far fewer originate with their supply chain here in the US. So we're not only losing momentum, in fact, we're falling behind. So ideally, what we'd like to see happen is that the jobs we begin to create are at the front end of the value chain, in design, in research and development. Instead, we're seeing the jobs we're creating really at the back end of the value chain, in construction and installation. So what is it that we should do? Well, first of all, energy utilities have long played a prominent role in our nation's development and economic health. So there's no question in my mind that we can do so again, helping America get through a challenging time to a better future. Now, this opportunity exists because utilities are uniquely equipped to put their resources to work in areas where the market isn't capable of doing so. And I think it's well understood that markets are not particularly efficient at pricing in long-run externalities, such as the long-run cost to society of falling behind in an economic race, or the long-run cost to society of not having energy security taken care of, or the long-run cost to society of environmental consequences that are 30, 40, and 50 years in the future. So where the market is not efficient, government can step in. And utilities have long been a tremendously successful vehicle at the deployment of capital to achieve social policy objectives. So let me talk about two of those social policy objectives. First, energy efficiency. If you're like me, you're left scratching your head why businesses don't invest in energy-saving improvements that have a 3-year payback, or why homeowners don't make comparable investments having a 6-month payback. And the reasons offered for this are very simple. Customers may not believe the payback is real. Second, they don't have the upfront cash. And third, they may simply not want to be bothered. They may think that this is not something that is worth their time or effort. So how does government step in to create an opportunity for these investments to be made? Well, one is by educating customers. So the customers themselves will want to make these investments, clearly a good way to approach. Second is to raise the price of energy, not something that's foremost in the minds of folks. But third is to allow utilities to make energy efficiency investments on behalf of customers. Now, how can we do that? Traditionally, we've been an industry where utility investments stop at the meter. Does that need to be the case going forward? And I don't believe it should. Certainly, if the objective is to lower customer bills or carbon emissions, then allowing the utility to earn a reasonable return by investing at devices beyond the meter is a plausible approach. In fact, our New Jersey regulators agreed to allow us to do that, and have given us the green light to spend $250 million in energy efficiency investments. However, to deliver the biggest bang for the buck, making sure that we did this in a way that was economically efficient was key. So we started with the idea that we needed to reach all customer segments, because universal access, I think, has been a long-standing cornerstone of our industry. Second, we focused on meeting the needs of customers who traditionally would not have access to the benefits of efficiency. In the past, rebate programs were quite prominently used, but for the most part, they were taken advantage of by people who could afford the upfront capital investments that needed to be made, typically the wealthiest segment of our customer base, with rebate funds that were being paid for by all of our customers, even those who could barely afford to make ends meet. So utilities are a vehicle for spreading these benefits, leaving no one behind. So we began with an energy efficiency program in urban neighborhoods, providing home energy checkups and improvements at little or no cost to low-income customers. Community and government agencies help with the training and hiring of a workforce, and otherwise help to encourage local participation. It's a partnership truly reflecting the unique capabilities of utilities, our brand, our skilled workforce, our access to customers. Lastly, we look for ways to help institutions that benefit the population at large. Some of those institutions were quite candidly local hospitals, because ratepayers use local hospitals, and we all know how cash-strapped those local hospitals are. So we carved out a specific part of the program which quickly became oversubscribed. Next, ratepayers are taxpayers too. They're deeply affected by the budget pressures on local government. So we targeted schools, municipal buildings, county offices, also oversubscribed. So there's a learning curve with any new initiative, but we're not only gaining valuable experience, we're bringing the benefit of energy efficiency to more customers, and we expect to create 700 jobs doing this in the next 2 years. Renewables are a second area where utility involvement can make a big difference, stepping in where the market isn't. Now, since renewable energy is more expensive at this point, public intervention is needed in the form of subsidies. My favorite, quite candidly, is a renewable energy standard. But even with this, the market will charge a higher rate if we expect the market to meet the RES as opposed to utilities. And why is that? Simply because the subsidy is a regulatory mandate, and the market will apply a much higher cost of capital to a revenue stream predicated based upon a regulatory mandate. Utilities are much more accustomed to managing regulatory risk and will apply a lower cost of capital in accepting that revenue stream over the long term. And that lower cost of capital will translate into lower costs for customers. So at PSE&G, we're putting more than $700 million into a range of solar energy initiatives. This includes more than $500 million in 80 megawatts of grid-connected solar projects, an effort we call Solar for All because it provides solar energy to all of our customers. And again, we're trying to match up those who are paying, in this case ratepayers, with those who are benefiting, in this case everyone connected to our grid. And we're doing it in a variety of ways. We're installing 200,000 solar panels on our poles, as well as installing solar panels on schools, not-for-profit, rooftops, and municipal facilities. Now, this activity is creating jobs. We're working with contractors who otherwise might be laying people off. And we're also working with a small company in New Jersey called Petra Solar, who's developed an inverter technology that allows us to put these multi-hundred-watt panels on poles and streetlights. Our experience has consistently shown that a utility involvement is instrumental in providing the universal access to energy efficiency and renewables at a lower cost that would be otherwise possible while generating jobs and a healthier environment. Now, this involvement is predicated, as I said before, on regulatory mechanisms that allow us to earn a reasonable return on our investment and allow us to earn that return promptly without the usual regulatory lag. Now, where this has happened, as in New Jersey, this involves a considerable expansion of our role. But this new role, I would offer, is critical to meet the challenges of our time and society's need for safe, reliable, economic, and green energy. This is a 21st century corollary, an update, if you will, of our role in providing universal access to electricity and gas in the previous century. Only now we're talking about providing that universal access to out-of-market solutions such as renewable and energy efficiency. But unfortunately, in too many places, we're still embedded in 20th century rules. So as energy transformation is underway, it's happening in fits and starts in different states that are progressive enough to attempt these experiments. But if we could do this on a national level, I believe we would unleash a tremendous amount of investment in this area. And I know for our part at PSEG, we are poised and ready and eager to invest billions, and that is with a B, in these areas. So how do we overcome this paralysis? Well, let me suggest a couple of steps that will help. First and foremost, we need to put a price on carbon in the United States of America. If we do so, we will be firmly on the path to sustainability because carbon will be one of the most marketable and largest products in the world. Second, we need to promote renewables through a national renewable energy standard. If I may digress for a moment and just say a word about transmission, because there are a lot of advocates such as us who favor a national renewable portfolio standard or renewable energy standard, who also favor socialization and a massive subsidization of the transmission system to move the renewable energy from location A to location B. We are not in favor of that. It seems to us to be economically inefficient to ignore the cost of transporting a good or a service from one location to another and factoring in where these resources ought to be developed. And we could talk more about that in the Q&A if folks are interested. In summary, it's worth emphasizing yet again that we cannot afford to stand idly by as green energy investments take off overseas, while we pass off the growth and jobs that it could mean to make such investments here at home. We cannot afford for a moment longer the fact that we live in a carbon-constrained world with urgent action demanded to arrest the changes that we're seeing in our planet's climate. We need to face up to both our energy and our environmental challenges, and as history has shown, the sooner we do this, the less costly it will be. To conclude, let me share some thoughts about what a sustainable energy future might look like. It's impossible to predict these features in detail or discern every winning technology down the road, but the broad outlines of a sustainable future might be suggested, with, once again, utilities playing an indispensable role. And I see the future in which utilities are leaders, serving the needs of an increasingly conservation-minded public, helping our customers to use energy more wisely, providing environmentally friendly supply with a strong focus on renewables, but an equally strong focus on carbon-free sources of central station power, such as nuclear, which I've not gone into in any detail today, and upgrading and replacing an aging infrastructure to improve service quality and reliability. Lastly, improving the functionality of the grid so that it can host environmentally driven distributed resources. Policymakers and regulators have indicated the support for such investments on many levels, but not in a ubiquitous fashion needed to unleash the investment levels that are required. This shouldn't be controversial. It's time for our nation to get on the path to a sustainable energy future. Our industry has an unmatched opportunity to play a leading role. With strong partnerships and sound public policies, our reinvented and reinvigorated industry can lead again. I look forward to your questions, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thanks, Ralph. I'd like to ask you first about transmission, because when we chatted a year ago, you elaborated a little bit more on what you had to say about that. And as I recall, you told me that some of your peers, fellow CEOs, were talking about the need for a national transmission highway under the guise of needing to move wind from the Midwest to the population centers. And as I remember, you said it might really be a way to bring dirty coal power to distant locations. You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. I'd be happy to. So think about the marginal cost of putting a kilowatt through a transmission line. It's essentially zero. And therefore, the most economic use of any capital investment such as transmission would be the full utilization of it. So most renewable resources, as you all know, are quite challenged in terms of their dispatchability. And you would end up with large capital investments that would be grossly underutilized. And as we also know, the only laws that the transmission system obey are Kirchhoff's laws, and they don't obey the laws of Congress or anyone else's for that matter. So therefore, the thought that one could build a transmission infrastructure only for renewables is at best economically inefficient and more probably naive. So you'd have a grossly underutilized asset unless you were willing to fill it with other sources of energy, which in most of the high wind states tend to be high coal states. The second thing that I've talked to folks about is many of you, I'm sure, like I, when you've had summertime barbecues, have had to go to the supermarket and buy ice cubes to supplement whatever your refrigerator wasn't able to make for the folks coming over. And I would just ask you to indulge me with a little bit of an exaggeration here. As you all know, those ice cubes are made in the back of the supermarket that you buy them from. And if you buy them in Washington, D.C. or New Jersey or New York, they're using 20 cent a kilowatt hour electricity to make those ice cubes. Now, if only we could get American taxpayers to fund an insulated rail system to the North Pole, we could get those ice cubes for free. And I mean, shouldn't we do that? Because that's where Mother Nature's providing it in great abundance. Well, of course, that's absurd. It's equally absurd to simply say that the calculus or the economics of where we should use wind energy should not include the transportation costs. Yes, the wind blows less in Pennsylvania than it does in Montana, but moving it from Pennsylvania to New Jersey might be so much less expensive than moving it from Montana to New Jersey. And at costs of sometimes $10 to $15 million a mile for transmission in the eastern part of the United States, those numbers add up quickly.
Let's talk about nuclear for a second. The Obama administration just in the last week or so announced it was committed to possibly tripling the amount of loan guarantees to help jumpstart a new generation of nuclear power plants. Yet when you and I chatted, you said you did not see your company as one in the vanguard building new nuclear power plants. Why is that?
So we currently own or operate 5 nuclear power plants. The 3 that we operate are in a part of the country called Eastern PJM. And I would argue that it's probably the most valuable nuclear site in the nation. Some others might argue it's not, but I think that anyone would agree it's one of the most valuable. And we are a merchant company. Our wholesale power is unregulated. So we need more than the loan guarantees to make the economic bet that the first few power plants that are built will come in close to where we think it will be right now. I just think that whenever you go through a process for the first time, there could be some unexpected surprises, and we can't fall back on regulation to make up the economic difference. So we will build a nuclear power plant at that site at some point in the future. I do think nuclear is going to be a critical part of our nation's infrastructure going forward, but we'll be a fast follower rather than a leader, primarily because we want to see others get the bugs out before we take that economic step.
One thing I'm curious about is several years ago, there was a proposal to merge Exelon and your company, and it failed after 19 months of negotiation. In retrospect, was that a good thing?
Well, it depends on how you refer to it. It was a good thing. No, the combination of PSEG and Exelon would have been a world-class company. So I think its failure was not a good thing. We would have had the balance sheet and the depth of talent to be a leader in new nuclear. Having said that, I think if you do the arithmetic right now, we probably were getting underpaid for our stock. So that would say that it was a good thing that it failed. What was a bad thing? So depending on how you look at it, it might have been a good thing, it might not have been a good thing. What was clearly a bad thing is you cannot have 20,000 people, the 10,000 employees of Exelon and the 10,000 people of PSEG, tormented for 19 months while government tries to figure out if this is a good thing or not. We literally had the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission opine on what would be required to mitigate market power issues, which we were the first to admit existed. So if that wasn't enough, then the Department of Justice, a second federal agency, had to opine on whether or not the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission got the solution right. So that seems a bit excessive. And then when they were done, of course, New Jersey, seeing that 2 people came up with different answers, had to opine on what the market mitigation techniques had to be. I think whenever you create that kind of regulatory burden and morass, you create a very inefficient environment for a business to operate. And we literally tortured employees for 19 months because people want to get on with their lives. So the process was, without question, a bad process.
Speaking of bad processes, let's talk about Washington for a minute. There are those that say this city doesn't work, and the debate over health care has certainly captivated our country for over a year now, with nothing as a result. You listed some prescriptions you have of where the energy sector needs to go. Realistically, as a politician, and most CEOs have to be politicians, what do you see happening?
First you ask me tough questions, then you insult me. So, well, I did work in Washington for 1 year, as you pointed out, and I remember that when I worked back then, there was a senator from Ohio, some of you may remember his name, was Howard Metzenbaum. Senator Metzenbaum was not shy about applying the filibuster capability tool. And I think that in those days, we would have 1 or 2 filibusters a year. And these were for issues that were do or die for some minority part of the U.S. Senate, but not such a small minority that cloture couldn't be invoked. I understand last year we had 119. it's just phenomenal. I mean, I know this was 25 years ago, but what has changed has been truly sad to see. So the other day I was at a forum. I won't mention the forum because you'll probably be able to extrapolate the member of Congress of whom I asked the question, and I politely raised my hand and said, I think most Americans are not easily compartmentalized as ultra-right or ultra-left, and we may be socially liberal, and we may be fiscally conservative, and we may wear different stripes on foreign policy. So how is it that Congress has become so partisan, almost looks like it's moving towards a parliamentary system of government where you build these impenetrable coalitions and move forward? I said, why aren't you more comfortable being with one group one day and another group another and kind of always being in the middle? And I was trying to give him an opportunity to be somewhat bipartisan, and he immediately said, well, those darn people on the other side of the aisle keep, it was just mind-boggling how where was I going with this? I don't know where I was going with this. So I guess I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful. I understand Senator Graham is saying and Senator Kerry are saying that they have a new approach to climate that will treat different industries differently, and that makes sense to me, that can reach across the aisle and do things for the supply advocates as well as the conservation advocates. And hopefully we can break the logjam. And I cannot venture any guess on healthcare. Okay.
Shelley has a microphone. I'd like to open the floor to the floor to make questions. And the only thing I ask is 1 or 2 sentences. No speeches, please. Anybody would like to ask Raplh Izzo a question?
Regulatory challenges facing utilities and some of your prescriptions for that. Can you talk a little bit about the business model changes that you see commensurate with that for utilities and for your suppliers as well as part of this transition?
So there needs to be an alliance between utilities and suppliers to overcome what I think is the primary obstacle to the changes I'm suggesting in going into energy efficiency and renewables in particular. And that obstacle needs to be that I stand here before you knowing full well that energy efficiency is not a natural monopoly service. There is no reason why the utility has to be the one to provide you with programmable thermostats or complex fluorescent light bulbs. I mean, you and I ought to be going into home improvement centers and buying that on our own. So we've begun having discussions with manufacturers of efficiency-related equipment who are now recognizing that they are going to constantly be captive to victims of the imperfections in the market unless they partner with utilities and say, we give up. The consumer will not do this on his or her own. I literally had the CEO of a Fortune 50 company say to me that he would not invest in energy efficiency unless the payback period was less than, are you ready for this? I'm so impressed that I kept a straight face when he said this. I have the scars on my cheeks to show for it. 3 months. 3 months. I said, what can you ever do? Now, most say a year, 2 years. So I think if manufacturers and local developers realize that the utility basically can be a financing entity and contract the labor, use some of their own labor, and purchase the equipment that manufacturers are making, then together we can go to regulators and say, this makes sense to do. Yes, rates will go up, bills will go down, and the utility property record unit won't stop at the meter. But not too many people have a relationship with their water heater. Not too many people have a relationship with their furnace. And they're okay getting that service from the utility.
There's been some recent studies that have come out potentially delaying construction and transmission in the Northeast. Can you elaborate from a regional perspective as well as your own?
So we're in the middle of a permitting for a 500 kilovolt transmission line that connects Susquehanna, Pennsylvania to Roseland in New Jersey. This is a 500 kV line that's needed for reliability reasons. It's been studied ad nauseum by ourselves, by PJM. It doesn't require a very sophisticated crystal ball. One only has to look back in time to August 14th of 2003 to know that there are some unique circumstances that can create some challenges during the summertime when demand is high, the double contingency circumstances. And as is so often the case, when there's a benefit to many, many million people that comes at the perceived expense to a few thousand who don't want it in their backyard, people will say no. And I will tell you that it's a painful process. I've talked to local officials who would say to me, Ralph, I know you need to do this, but I can't say yes. Don't worry, the state regulators will give you the approval you need. I said, yeah, and at what expense? 6 months, brand damage, but so it was. And then we go to the state regulators who had a year to do this and literally took 54 weeks to do something that was painfully obvious. So transmission siding is something that, for reliability purposes, I think desperately needs FERC backstop authority, because the multi-state benefits cannot be held hostage to single state special interests. Sorry.
What do you see as the relationship moving forward between utilities and what are generally called demand response suppliers or curtailment suppliers?
So in the markets in which we operate, I do think that DSM, demand and response, as I define it, can compete in capacity markets. So there, because we operate most of our assets in PJM, I'd say that those relationships are one in which the utility backs away and the DSM provider competes with the supply side of the equation. That may be different in fully regulated areas, in which case I would see there being some type of partnership where the utility contracts with the DSM service provider to install hardware, et cetera. But in PJM, where we have a robust and vibrant wholesale market, there I don't see the logical connection. I would really look in those places where the market is simply walking away from an opportunity that it should not walk away from, or in which the market is, and that would be energy efficiency, which I view as different than DSM, or where the market is acting properly given the inefficiency in the price signal, which is renewables.
One last question. Bill?
Thanks. I was following up on your transmission line point, Bill Hederman from Concept Capital. I was in the pipeline business, and people were not exactly clamoring to have pipelines in their neighborhoods or through their lands. But there was a long tradition of making it worth their while to allow it. Is there an element of compensation to people along rights of way and tax relief and so forth that can help, or does it just have to be banging the heads and somebody loses?
Well, I'm never a fan of banging your heads and somebody losing, because I think you can have a real great winning streak, but people have long memories and then eventually comes back to haunt you. So we do compensate. We get called all sorts of things for compensating. So we try to understand and create a nexus between the form of compensation and the activity. So if we're engaged in construction activity, then there might be some open space restoration, or there may be some emergency services enhancement. But you would not believe, or maybe you would believe, I could not believe the things that we were called when we offered compensation. And I could not believe the names that were used to describe the few towns that accepted the compensation. And it was stuff that would make you blush if you can imagine that. So I do think you have to compensate because you are asking a few thousand people to bear the burden that's going to benefit a few million. But the burdens have to be bounded, right? I mean, we're not talking here about, I don't know, strip mining. I mean, we're talking about taking a 90-foot pole on an existing right-of-way and turning it into a 150-foot pole. And that should not make the world spin off its axis. I mean, that should not create the kind of hysteria that we see. And it's alarming to see that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. If you're, as I am, impressed with Ralph's intelligence and candor, you'll have a chance to hear from him again tonight at at our banquet, and we're adjourned for another 15 minutes, and we'll reconvene across the hall. Thank you.